You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Power Athlete Radio listeners, we have a special podcast for you today with Carolyn Wester. I was first introduced to Carolyn via longtime Power Athlete coach Bryce Walcott. He works as a wrestling coach in Arizona and thought Carolyn would be an excellent guest for her outside-the-box thinking and unique position in the world of combat sports. Carolyn Wester is a world-class coach for thousands of wrestlers and professional MMA fighters. She founded Wrestling Prep in 2005 as a nonpartisan wrestling academy, allowing athletes regardless of educational institution, club affiliation, and training organization to participate and learn from her unique approach. She caters to every level of wrestling with the singular goal of increasing performance. Having never wrestled herself and coming from the business finance world, she takes a unique approach to training, grappling, and wrestling, and how best to prepare athletes for the demands of their sport. As a self-defined outsider, she has quickly become one of the most sought-after coaches in the world and counts Daniel Cormier and Khabib Nurmagomedov as her athletes. I'm fascinated by her approach and look forward to meeting her in person. Buckle up, let's get to it. Carolyn Wester. Welcome to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. I am joined today by Carolyn Wester, who I'm really actually a little blown away going through all the bio stuff with you. I mean, I wouldn't think about female wrestlers and more importantly, wrestling coach for as much as you've done. So it's not necessarily something I associate with women, but wrestling is probably one of the largest growing sports for female athletes, especially down here in Texas, which is kind of blowing me away. And the only way I have a connection to that is obviously Matt Pollock, who's works with us, and he's a wrestling coach. So it's an interesting world, seeing as that I come from football.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, just if you want to get in a little bit of your bio and introduce yourself, it'd be awesome.
Sure. So I started coaching in 2005 at Stanford University, just because my youngest child was interested in wrestling, and I went over there, and lo and behold, now I'm the first and only chief corner in the UFC. I have coached 5 USA world teams, all men. I have had more high school national champs than anyone else in the country, and I probably coach 2,000 to 4,000 people a year now that we're out of COVID again. People come from all over the world for me to coach them. We've had athletes so far this summer from 26 states and 3 foreign countries.
Wow. But your background wasn't wrestling. So you got into it in 2005. So what was your background that led you to this? And then it's kind of dispelling the myth that you have to have probably done this at a competitive level to be able to coach it.
Yes, for sure. I didn't have any athletic experience around wrestling whatsoever. I swam in my youth and rode horses. My parents were from Kentucky. Went to an all boys camp, but I never wrestled a day in my life. But I do have an affinity for math and patterns. So when my son wanted to wrestle, I was at Stanford, and there were some athletes wrestling at a higher level. And I'd been doing venture capital for a long time and gotten to a point, John, I'd lost both my parents in the past 2 years, and I had gotten divorced. And I just was sort of in a lull. So I'm sitting there on the ground at Stanford, the mat, and I said, is the goal to put this structure, this human in this position? And they said, yes. I said, oh, well, the structure you're making with your body is not congruent to that end result. So if you were an engineer, you would be fired. And that's how it started. And that's what I saw. So there were some athletes at Stanford at the time who are now really well known, Jason Welch and a bunch of other wrestlers. And I started working with them, just really sort of just throwing it out there, and it turned into something. And then in 2011, Daniel Cormier called me on the phone and said, can I bring some athletes over to watch you coach? I said, sure. And he came over and he called me the next day and said, we want you to come coach us. So I went to AKA in 2011, and about 8 months later, Javier Mendez, who's the man there, said, you should be cornering because you're unemotional and fact-based, and this is what we want you to do. And it really turned into something beyond what I ever thought I would have an opportunity to do.
So what are you doing? I mean, it sounds like a unique approach where all of a sudden you come at it with fresh eyes without necessarily having the like historical background. I sometimes wonder, the people that change things aren't necessarily the people that, grow steeped up in the deal, that kind of tend to look at it from a different perspective with fresh eyes. So you coming in, having a different perception and really not having this historical legacy of like, hey, this is what I did, which I feel like ruins most of sports where everybody's coaching like, well, that's not how I did it. So obviously it's not right because everybody was right. We see it in football all the time with, well, that's not how Bear Bryant did it. I'm like, well, he's also 100 years old and, has a funny hat, which they don't wear anymore. But as you got into it, was that like the major kind of conflict in a lot of ways where people are like, she doesn't know what she's doing. She never did this.
Yeah, so for sure. And it's still, not so much today, but, it occurred all the time. And but really, once the better the athlete, as soon as I put my hands on them and start moving them or explaining or changing an angle or straightening their wrist, they immediately go, oh, this is 25%, 40% better. And I think when all the big fighters at American Kickboxing Academy at the time, Daniel, Luke Rockhold, Khabib started. He lived in my home for a while with all the Dagestanis. When they all preferred me to run practice, then I think I realized that I just stopped trying to make people who didn't understand what I was doing happy or try to explain to them in a way that makes them happy. Sometimes I think about, you see a violent crime or something and you go, what were they thinking? I'm like, who wants to know what they were thinking? I'm grateful I don't think their way. So sometimes when I would find coaches and their athletes wouldn't get better and their self-image was based on how the athlete did, that was very counterproductive in any sport. And so I just shied away from that. And they would say, well, that's not how, whoever, Gene Mills did it. And I'm like, I don't know Mr. Mills. But what I do know is that the torque and the wattage situation is more violent than what he was trying to do.
So when you you're coaching technique, let's say, right? So you're trying to put them in like the most advantageous positions, show them how to pass through different movements, and like probably map them out like if this then that. Which is I'll just tell you, I played in the NFL and come from like a martial arts boxing kind of background, and the boxing and all the skills that I developed in the ring tended to really help me playing in the NFL. But the one thing which has really been hysterical is if I ended up on my back with somebody on top of me, everything's gone wrong and I no longer have a job. So when I started working with, Victor and the jiu-jitsu guys, the fact that like I started training with them and actually I was on my back with people on top of me, it like takes everything that I have to like mentally like partition this hatred of this position. So, and I also know for wrestlers, the last place they ever want to be is on their back as well with somebody on top of them. So it's pretty interesting that like, wrestling has influenced jiu-jitsu so much, but yet like that's a very, preferred position for these guys to be on their back. So it's taken a lot of like me having to humble myself to be in these positions. And then it's, training with Matt and seeing these wrestlers where they're like, no, we hate being on our backs. So then like, fighting out of these positions and what, it's been really, really fascinating. But the application to jiu-jitsu and like kind of this like melting of what we know as mixed martial arts, if you kind of look at like the hierarchy, the guys that come from a wrestling background tend to be the most dominant individuals in the UFC today.
It's so interesting. So Victor has a longtime opponent who I think he beat the last time in Muhammad Ali. He and I and another man have a jiu-jitsu studio here in Northern Virginia. And I do some wrestling out of there, but it's so interesting. The concept in jiu-jitsu that I feel for wrestling, that a straight line is faster and often stronger than a circle, is hard to get a jiu-jitsu mindset. That's their predominant trait. They have a hard time understanding that. So when they wrestle somebody who, what I call math-based or body leveraged wrestling, it's very hard for them to beat them. And that was one of the big things that I think Javier Mendez felt in terms of striking and wrestling for me with the fighters, was that I was able to take a jiu-jitsu athlete or a Muay Thai athlete and help them transition their weight and their torque and help them increase their velocity and often their voltage by their wattage, excuse me, by what order they use their muscles. So the way a jiu-jitsu person transitions their weight is very different than a wrestler. And so if you transition your weight to strike or wrestle in MMA the way you would do in jiu-jitsu, you're probably 85%, 90% more vulnerable to your opponent if their predominance is wrestling. So those are things that I saw that other people didn't see.
Can you break that down a little bit more? Because I mean, I don't have a wrestling background, but I understand, I really enjoy watching it just for the mere fact that I, like the grind and the hard work, and just the fact that these dudes just do not give up and, have all the attributes. It's kind of funny. When I was in high school, I was a pretty good football player pretty early on. So at that point, they kind of I ran track and did some other things. And one of my coaches, who was also a history coach, was like, "Hey, I want you to come wrestle." And there was the football coaches being like, "No, you can't go wrestle. You're going to lose too much weight." And at the time, we were obsessed with trying to be bigger and stronger. And not, we thought that if I lost a pound, I was never going to find it again. Right. And that kind of kept me out of it. And it's one of my big regrets, because whenever I played against a guy that has a wrestling background, and I'll just give you an example, I was already a pretty established starter, and Steve Neal, who was playing for the Patriots, ends up, not making the Olympic team in wrestling, and then comes out and goes and gets a tryout with the Patriots, was on the practice squad. He signed us to our practice squad, the Eagles. And I remember working with him, and he knew nothing of football. And I remember showing him techniques, and he's like, I think I'm just going to stand in front of them and just kind of get in their way and just hold them in place. And I was like, go for it. And ended up going on, and he ended up having a nice career in the NFL with zero understanding of how to play football, but understanding leverage and torque and position and how to stay in front of a guy, and really just how to use his natural skills to be very, very dominant, which was really hysterical for me, because I'm like, man, I've been playing my whole life trying to execute a set of skills to be a good football player. And this dude just was a high level wrestler and just showed up and was killing people. So at that point, I regretted not learning wrestling and not, doing it early on. And it's been something that's come back. And now I realize, man, I wish I had developed this skill set earlier. And we've been doing jiu-jitsu, obviously, but it's kind of interesting what you said, where you're able to take these guys and teach them a skill set, because I was hoping you could get a little deeper into that just from my own knowledge.
Well, so to begin with, I want to tell you that I'm also autistic. So sometimes the way I explain things comes out a little awkwardly. So forgive me, just ask me again. And I think it's my job to explain myself so people can understand. I think that's part of the reason why I'm a good coach, because I'm not really, it's not about, my self-image isn't based on how I do as a coach. So I'm happy to keep answering over and over. So I think what I noticed initially with jiu-jitsu, Javier Mendez asked me to work with a man who was in doing competition in a gi, and he kept describing this situation in which he would get grabbed and thrown. And I said, when does that happen? At the beginning of every match. So in my head, I'm thinking it's wrestling, freestyle wrestling, like parterre situation where it's determined the person gets to go first. I said, well, how do they decide your opponent gets to grab you first? He said, they don't. He just grabs me. I said, don't let him grab you. And if he grabs you, don't let him pull you. And I asked him to replicate that situation. And this person, who was a very skilled jiu-jitsu athlete, had all his weight in the front of his body. So John, he would be leaning forward. He'd have his knees bent. His glutes and ass would be back a little bit, but really making about 120-degree angle between his torso and his quad, but no way to redistribute the weight backwards. And I'm like, if you get in a staggered stance, you make a 90-degree angle with your trail leg, your knee is parallel to the mat, your heel is over the toe, 12 to 6, like a traditional clock. You could tract your back hamstrings, squeeze the muscle to the left and the right of your scrotum, pull your transverse ab against your spine, peel your shoulder blades together. They won't be able to pull you. He said, yes, they will. I said, they won't. And they can't. And that's what I see that other people don't see. I don't see that as a technique that was taught by someone in jiu-jitsu, or that was what, someone used in early UFC. I just see the math. And then I realized when I was working with people, athletes, that like you're describing, somebody who's extremely successful, and not only successful, but financially successful on their sport, like you, John. And then you have other people kids who are, their whole self-image is based on their parents being able to post that they won something, which of course is a treacherous slope. But you have these people and they want to do what they feel like they're good at. So to convince someone to work with someone and help them understand how they can do what they're already doing better and add on a skill set that won't require the same amount of time and effort to learn as they did initially. Mm-hmm. If I could just get them to do this math-based movement, sequential muscle order that works for jiu-jitsu or wrestling or striking. Sure. And it's not because I'm trying to, I don't really make a big deal. I guess I can make a bigger deal out of what I've done, but I really don't. I just want kids to go to college, and I want people to feel that they have control of their body, and they put all this time and effort in these disciplines that make them better humans, but they struggle and they think just working harder is going to make the difference. And I'm like, let's just change that angle between your forearm and your bicep, and I think I can help.
What it sounds like is you created a blueprint for efficient human movement for the sport at which you're using it, which is very similar to what I've done here at Power Athlete in terms of playing football. I figured out pretty early on that there were certain positions that I was dramatically stronger in, and there were positions that other guys were dramatically weaker in. And then what in football is they do is there's a lot of historical reference and preference. So like so-and-so did it this way. And I'm like, yeah, he's also 6'8", 350 pounds. So when you're that big, you can get away with a lot of really kind of garbage technique and some bad angles. And then there's this like, well, so-and-so did it this way. This must be the best way. And I remember thinking like, I physically am not that big. I mean, I'm, almost 6'6", but I'm not 350 pounds. So I remember looking at it like, all right, there's a leverage position, knees need to track over my insteps. I can't turn my foot out because then I have a soft hip. So I was real big on like pulling in and trying to create angles, setting deeper. I mean, there was all of these different things that I did that were unique for me physically, just for the mere fact that I couldn't it's like what I call the curse of the gifted. If you take the best athletes in the world and you build a system off of them, it's going to be broken, because they inherently are able to do things that the average person couldn't. And I used to see that all the time. I'm like, well, dude, this guy's super athletic. He's 6'8", 350 pounds. Like, why would you think that I can do what he does? And it's kind of insane that that's the technique that you would teach. So I believe me, I know 100% of what you're saying, but also the fact that, and I know this from jiu-jitsu, that guys are kind of lazy, for a lot of times, like when they get into the clinch, it's almost the first person that acts, the first person that goes for a throw is the one that's usually going to get it. So it ends up kind of favoring the person that is by far the, most aggressive in all of these things. So no, that makes a ton of sense.
You say some really interesting things to me that pop out. Yeah, well, you say some really interesting things to me that, pop out in my head. A lot of, when I first started watching wrestling at Stanford, I would see these coaches and athletes coming to these youth and saying, in the third period, if you're down by 3 and the person's here, and I'm like, are you teaching these kids by situation? And they said, yes, of course. I said, it's a 6 minutes match. And I had this athlete shoot, reshoot 20 times in 20 seconds. So you're saying there's 3,600 situations and you're going to try to teach a kid a sport where they're going to have to comprehend situation? So why don't we figure out what, well, first of all, let's apply some logic to the circumference of this mat. So how many movements can actually be done? And then let's figure out what would be the best sequential muscle order that would comprise the technique that would work against the best math-based body position somebody else could have. And let's kind of throw the rest out so these kids don't give up this opportunity to be in this sport that's so great. And you'd think that I had, cut their privates off. Like, they flipped out that's how I saw it. But 20% of them said that's way better. And when I first was at AKA, I asked Javier Mendez if I could watch him striking, coaching striking, because we do it in a different part of the facility. And he said, sure. And I went over, and he's just recently said this on a podcast. That's where I heard him say it. He said, she afterwards said to me, Coach, I think you said this, this, and this. And he said, literally, it was 20% better than he had ever explained it in his life. And he said, and I'm a multi-time world kickboxing champion. She's never had a glove on her hand in her life. And I just would see these things. And, John, you were talking about your soft hip and the way you turn your foot. I will see coaches who have a long torso and short legs telling an athlete who's got a short torso and long legs to try to stand up off bottom with a person of equivalent weight and distribution on top of them, controlling their base or their 90-degree angles, to do it the same way they would. And that's like trying to put a VW tire on a Bentley. It doesn't work. But they don't see it because that's the way they did it years ago, or they just aren't paid at the time to figure it out.
Well, we see the same thing with lifting weights, right? If you have an athlete with a long torso and a short leg, if they're going to go deadlift, they're going to pull the bar in a completely different way than somebody with a long legs and a short torso. So anthropometrical ratios depend upon how the athlete's going to move through space and how they're going to, pull load off the ground, how they're going to squat, X, Y, and Z axis, and, how they move through these different planes of motion. And then we start adding rotation and, different axes. I mean, it's just, everybody becomes unique in that they're all set up a little bit different. But the one thing that's not unique is that, like, the point at which you are strongest is going to be dependent upon that. I mean, we've seen it, not only with football. For me, in football, I used to sit real low in my stance, like almost like the hips below the knees, so I could lift my head up and I could look around. Most of the guys were, played almost with a flat back, and they couldn't lift their heads, but I needed to look around. But I was also strong enough to play from that position because I trained in that position. And so they were like, oh, that's not an advantageous position. I'm like, no, it's not for you. But for me, that was an advantageous position. So I watch offensive line stuff, and I watch football peripherally, and I watch how these guys teach. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a one-size-fits-all program for everybody, because they don't have an intrinsic knowledge of, like, human movement, and they don't understand where people generate force, and they don't understand angles. And then they're also not taking into account what I call people's wheelhouse. Like, there's certain things that each athlete has that, like, if they don't have that, it doesn't make sense for me to coach them to do these things. Like, for me, I was always like a real big punch, and I could, like, move my feet because I had an intrinsic skill for it. So if somebody doesn't have that, I'm not going to teach them the same way, and it's like, I'm super frustrated. I mean, they probably do the same thing in wrestling. It's easier just to go recruit a bunch of kids that look just like you than it is to actually develop a whole bunch of different styles of athletes.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So many people think they're coaching because they want to do it for the kids on and off the mat. And I don't think they're lying, like, out loud verbally, but when it comes time for their actions, it's not the case. And they get super frustrated and they yell and they tell the kids it's their fault or it's their parents' fault. Or even in fighting, I see it. We'll be in the green rooms before a fight, and I'm watching other people warm up their fighters, and they're like, you have to do it this way. And I'm like, I don't think 3 minutes before this fight starts, this dude is going to learn something new. Why don't we just make him better at what he's doing and, have a big prayer that it works. But it's something in it. And I know that people, especially in wrestling, they love the sport. They love it. Jiu-jitsu, they love it. I'll go into a jiu-jitsu place and they'll ask me to help. And someone who's been there like 3 days will cut me off. And the guy will say, just let her finish. But they just love it. They love it. They're passionate about it. And so they want it to be just one way, but there's no shortcut to greatness. That's not the way life is. That's not the way sports is. And if you try to go down that path and you're always trying to hammer it into a small subset, you have to wonder, are you doing it for yourself? Are you coaching for yourself because you want to be something? Or are you really trying to help people?
We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Are you pushing through performance roadblocks caused by pain or janky movement mechanics? Knock the rust off with our movement health courses, used by thousands of athletes worldwide, from average Joes to MVPs. Our courses give you the tools to assess and fix yourself so you can get back to break-in necks and cash in checks. Not convinced? Get a taste of how our courses can help you by enrolling in a free sample today. Head to powerathletehq.com and search courses from the menu. Now back to the show. There's an easy distinction with this, and I made this distinction years ago. I'm not married to anything other than performance. So I used to joke, and I've referred to myself as a performance whore for years. I just want to know how to be the best. I don't have any ego in it. And I think what a lot of times is people get steeped in this like a methodology or what I call dogma, where like, hey, this is how we do it. This is all these pieces. And we see it in the training space. We see it in football. We see it in all sports. And I've never subscribed to it, because if something good comes along, I want to be able to absorb it. And, I've learned from some incredible coaches, and there's things I like and there's things that I don't. And the age old Bruce Lee, keep what's useful, discard what's useless. And if you find somebody that has the ability to make you better, like, you don't have any ego on that. For me, the only ego comes with like wins and losses. And I'm with you on the same deal. I used to watch this all the time, where coaches were trying to coach on the sideline before the game. I used to just get them up and walk away. And my comment to them is, I don't want to be in a foxhole with any of you motherfuckers. Like, if you're over here trying to coach and like, there's hand grenades coming out, like, I just need people that are like, we've done the work. I have confidence that we have a game plan in place. Now let's go out and let playmakers be playmakers. If you're trying to make adjustments, like, I'm not your guy.
I used to see that. It wasn't when the first fight I cornered was with Javier Mendez. And when I got there, I didn't know I was the first woman to have done it in the UFC as the chief corner that wasn't a girlfriend or a spouse or something, right? And so I could tell that they thought it was odd, and people were really, really nice to me. But after that first fight, a man came up to me and he said, it was actually from Jackson Winklejohn. He said, you don't know me, and I want to tell you that Javier Mendez told me last night that he thinks you're the best wrestling coach in the world. And he said, and people don't tell you that till you're later, and you're in this role. He's like, how does it make you feel? I said, I don't know. I can't wait to find out, to learn something from somebody else, because I can't be the end all of anything. I'm just here. I was grateful, but I'm just here trying to do this. And then I found, over time, I would be, I'd come into the room at AKA, and somebody would come in who was new, and and Khabib would say, oh, your shit. No, she, come on, coach, let's go. And I started to realize that the more successful fighters preferred my input, but I never try to dominate the situation. Yeah. I don't go in and if you want me to teach you how to do the sequential muscle order that I teach, like when people come to camps and stuff in the summer, I'm going to teach that. But if I'm invited into somebody else's room and I'm watching, I'm going to pick what I'm sure that nobody else there sees, and that's going to matter for them immediately, not just so I can start talking and say, this is how I did it when I'm in the corner with Khabib, right? Yeah. Nobody cares. It just has to be effective for the person I'm working with, and I have to be open to every situation, because otherwise you're not helping. I think you're not helping.
Do you think it's easier to teach a wrestler how to strike than it is a striker how to wrestle?
No. I think a wrestler has a hard time. So when you saw Aaron Pico, who I've known since he was a little boy, you saw his first Bellator fight, he immediately got knocked out his first fight, and everybody was predicting he was win, because he immediately, in the moment, went back to wrestling and he tried to shoot. Yeah. And the guy, just knocked him out. Or you saw it with Ben Askren and Jorge Masvidal. I was a corner on that fight card, and Jorge we'd been up at the UFCPI, and he was sitting down and watching me coach. He's like, I want to watch you coach. And I saw him practicing in the ring there at the PI on the second floor, what he was intending to do to Askren. But that's just what happened to Ben. It went up and they go for it. People who've wrestled a long time don't understand the difference between wrestling for fighting and fighting for wrestling. But if you're just teaching someone, teaching a striker how to wrestle, they're so uncomfortable with their body moving. A striker how to wrestle, they're so uncomfortable with their body forward. Once you get them in a stable position, they don't try to go back to a position that worked for them in wrestling, but won't work in fighting.
Oh, okay.
So it's like it's like probably teaching a doctor today a procedure that somebody's in their 60s or 70s would want to revert back to something that's not as effective.
Yeah, but we've seen Bo Nickel, who obviously a high level wrestler, come in, and he's been pretty dominant early on.
Let me tell you about Bo. I'm sure Bo would say, yes, I know who she is. Carolyn is. But Bo is an exception. So in the process, when Bo was at Penn State, He was friends with Nick Nevels, who's an athlete I've worked with forever. And there was another really good Penn State wrestler who wanted to fight. Bo got on a 4-way messaging with me early on. And I would answer questions. I would say, here are the management people I know. This is what we see. He researched what he was doing for years. He wasn't looking for the sycophantish relationship that the crowd gives you when you're at a school like Penn State into fighting. I just saw him at the UFC I guess during the US Open. I was over there with an athlete in Penn State and brought their guys over to cut weight. And he's just like, hey, Carolyn, just super nice, super easygoing, blushes when you talk to him about, his personal life in any way. And is a really good guy. And I think he's unique, AKA because of Daniel, we've had a huge influx of wrestlers to AKA. And I would say that most of them aren't ready to shed that skin of, I was so great at this, I've just totally got to let it go. It's almost like if you've been married once and you're starting again, like you have to go, oh, all these things about first go, I have to remove if I'm going to try for a second go. And they don't see that yet. They're really young, and their self-image for a very long time has been partially based on what other people say to them and how they accept them. And they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it.
Wow.
They have to get knocked out a few times for them to go, maybe I need to change.
How good is Daniel Cormier?
How good is Daniel at wrestling and fighting?
Yeah.
He is, next to Luke Rockhold, he has got to be the most mathematically beautiful, if you have a math brain, person to watch do any sport, whether we're playing kickball or soccer or anything. I mean, Daniel's, the math of his movement, where he puts his body, how he positions himself is incredible. And he is probably, I'm sure I could pick up this phone and call him and put 911 and he would be here in 2 hours, wherever I was. He's the most incredible friend.
Nice. Yeah, no, our mutual friend Laura Senko said the exact same thing. And then I made a crack on him. I'm like, well, man, if we could just get him in better shape then. Because that was, I always felt like that was something that he always.
Oh, he's chubby.
I know, like I was always amazed at, for such a high level wrestler and a guy that trained in that, like he just never really looked the part.
He tried to get me one time he offered me like $200 not to call his nutritionist at the time when I found a bunch of Popeyes wrappers on his floor. I will tell you that he told me that the most money he ever spent at Popeyes at one time was $345.
That's a lot of Popeyes.
Yeah, it's a lot of Popeyes, but he not chubby because he just likes to sit around and eat. He's chubby because he's moving from place to place, trying to help as many people as possible. And he came from that kind of a childhood. I think kind of I don't think they had very much. And I think he just wants to give, because I could text him a million things about himself or whatever. But if there's a kid hurting or in trouble, or I need help with somebody to get the situation, that dude, like I used to say to him, because when I didn't know him really well, I'd say, hey, can I talk to you on Tuesday? I'd say it's Saturday. What's wrong? Somebody mean to you? Do you need me to call someone? Did someone not treat you well? Like wow. He's on it. And he's the same way with my adult children.
Oh, wow.
He's always, my daughter babysat his kids, and he's an incredible friend.
Yeah,
incredible friend.
He's not only had an incredible career, but also he's a really good commentator. Like I'm always, I know this is kind of interesting, but I always think that the fighters that are able to move onto the other side and commentate and do really well, are much more cerebral fighters, to understand it, to be able to explain it to a bunch of people that don't understand anything about fighting. That's what, I think is so great with like him and, Joe Rogan to some extent, is super technical, understanding it, and is able to explain it in such a way that a bunch of drunk idiots can understand it. So it's definitely, I mean, same thing with football. I mean, people love, Tony Romo and John Madden and those guys because they were able to explain it, and John Gruden to some extent. just because they were able to explain it in such a way that, like, you know, you don't have to have a 10-year career in the NFL. I mean, like I watch it, I know what's going on, but the fact that like my mom can sit there and watch and be like, oh, I understand, and can actually talk about this stuff, to be able to do that is very, very special. You said that you worked with Khabib.
Yes.
The Dagestani fighters are, you know, kind of I don't know if this is social media or what, but I mean, they've almost created this like a little bit of like a mythology about these individuals. They train up in the hills and the mountains, and, you know, like the training, and they'll show little clips of their training hall and how much effort they put forth in their conditioning and whatnot. How much is, I mean, the real deal, or is it it's the real deal?
I was just with them for 5 weeks in May at AKA when Manap Abukar Nurmagomedov was getting ready for his fight, and Khabib was there, and I was there, and Cain Velasquez is, you know, he's able to come to AKA and coach while he's, I don't know what you call it when you're out of jail.
Does he have an ankle bracelet on?
Yes, he does.
Yeah, dude, that's a bad deal.
He is the most. I went in the first day I was there, and I had my assistant coach with me, and Cain like just held me, and I just started crying. And one night after we were doing this late night conditioning up in the private fighters room, because AKA is not open during the day to the public, so then, you know, it's a subscription gym, so there's a lot of kids and stuff after 3:30. So there's a private room for training for the fighters, and we're all up there. And it's me and Khabib and Cain and Cain's son, little boy, Cain Jr., and a bunch of people, you know, maybe 10. And Khabib starts asking Cain about what prison was really like. And so it's me and Cain and Khabib, and they're just talking about it. And Khabib is, you know, emotionally distraught for his friend. And Cain is saying how he's got such a tough mind, and he's a tough mind, so he doesn't break. And I mean, but it was, and there's more, you know, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to say, but that is the truth. And when they first came here, my son tried to help him use our washing machine, you know, just like the clothes washer. And I don't know where I was, but I guess he didn't tell him how to use the dryer. He was in 7th or 8th grade, and they hung up all their stuff outside my house in the trees in Palo Alto by Stanford. And so the police came. They thought somebody was being funny with my son because all this stuff was hanging in our front yard. Like they literally didn't know. But the thing that I was most, well, if you ever see Khabib or those guys around me, because I'm a woman, you know, they don't hang out with women very much, but they always make it so I can be there. So we were at a Bellator fight. Both of us had people on the card, and we were all there. They made sure that the restaurant, like the front half of the restaurant, wasn't available to the public, so I could sit in the back with them. They have
that whole deal where like they don't what is it, like women can't like be interviewed by women. I know, and I know the female reporters kind of made a big stink about it, and I liked Khabib's response where this isn't what women do, and we have a lot of respect for women, so therefore it's not as if we don't want to be interviewed by women, but we don't view this as like a task that is a woman should belittle themselves to. And you know, I don't know if anybody told them to say it, but it came out pretty gangster. I was like, dude, that's pretty awesome. And it's like, how can you bitch about that? So that's as I, you know, heard that statement, and then you're, you know, obviously they're able to bring you to the training hall. So I was going to ask how that kind of whole deal works.
Well, there was interesting. I was in Trnava, Slovakia in, I think, 2018 for the Junior World Championships. And there's a kid at Cornell now, Josh Saunders. I was cutting his weight. And as you know, when people are cutting weight in their knees, they have knee injuries and stuff. So it's common, probably like for me to crab ride him or crab ride an athlete and have them, you know, do sort of like jiu-jitsu rolls to pull my weight with their weight to continue the sweating process when their knees are no longer capable. So I was in a different, not the main venue, but cutting weight. And the Iranian coach came over and stood over me, and I looked up and stuck out my hand, and he said, "Oh, no woman touched me. You need to leave." I'm like, "I'm not leaving." But I look to my right and I see Abbas Magomedov as a world champ wrestler now, but these Dagestanis, these Russians. And I don't pay attention when people are rude to me, especially in international. I don't do anything to cause a conflict, but I'm not going to, you know, run away. So And so that night at dinner, I was just sitting there, and the same guy came back, and he had another Iranian with him, and I'm on the phone, and they're standing over me. It's just one of those places like a cafeteria where, everybody who's on the world team eats at the same place, competing eats at the same place. So the next morning, Josh Saunders is breaking down. He's still like 8 pounds over. We're weighing in 3 hours. He's a mess. And that Iranian comes back, and the Russian coach comes over and stands in front of him and said, do not speak to her. And he said, what? He said, do not speak to her. She's our brother. And he said, excuse me. He said, the Nurmagomedov say she is his coach and his brother. Don't speak to her. And that's so somebody on that team recognized me from those guys in Colt. And that was the response they got. And after that, I mean, the whole place went quiet because, everybody's watching to see, because I am the only woman.
Sure.
Doing it. So, and I don't really think of myself that way. I grew up, a family owned a boys camp and a military school. I'm kind of a boy, and I guess in that regard, I could shoot and hunt and clean fish and all that things. But that's how they feel about me. And when I see them, it's almost, I don't know if you have children, but sometimes children will come stand right next to you.
I got 3.
When we were at AKA, like I'll be standing on the wall by myself, and then I'll look down, and, one of them is sitting, they could sit anywhere, but they always are, we're as close as we could be without ever, and we don't have to see each other all the time. We don't talk regularly, but when I see them, they're super enthusiastic to have me around. I was actually going to go to Nashville in 2 weeks for Umar's fight, but he just pulled from the fight yesterday.
Yeah, I saw that.
He must have got hurt sparring on Wednesday.
Yeah, I literally just watched a thing on it this morning in prepping for this, and they were, of course they got to give the 3 reasons. He either got hurt, and, those fighters are, if you're not 100%, don't go out and look like an asshole, which I appreciate. And then the other one was, did he test positive for something? And then I think I know. It was just, because there's a whole stink now that like.
He posted the video of him getting hurt. You could see it.
Well, I know, but there was, I forgot whether it was Joe Rogan or something, but there was something where like USADA doesn't go to like up in the mountains where their training facility is very often. So, and I love the fact that people try to like cast these aspersions and shit on them. But have you been to their training facility?
No.
Oh, you never been there?
No. One, Umar's in California. He was in California when I was there. And then he went to Vegas, I think, for a little bit with their manager, Ali, who's another great person. And then he's in California.
Gotcha.
They always say they probably would travel maybe the Sunday or Saturday or Friday before to Nashville, but normally they travel from there. I saw that Islam announced his next fight, and it's in Abu Dhabi. They obviously won't come to California for that, but if they're going to be here and fight on this time cycles of the United States, they come and stay a very long time.
Oh, just to make sure that they're adapted to the time. And
yes.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yes. They have a pattern. Like they're very, I don't know how to say, like they're so loyal. I was actually at a fight. Islam was fighting, and I had a fighter on the card. Khabib was there. And it's when they offered him the first time to fight McGregor, and he accepted, but they were really using it as a ploy to try to pull out Tony Ferguson.
Oh.
And, Khabib. So all of this, so we're, you're just, I don't know if you've ever been to a fight or fight week, but it's like 95% sitting around and 5% doing something. So, you're just picking at the same French fry on your plate. You know what I mean? Like talking, looking at, Khabib showing me video of his daughter, and, we're just hanging out. And he didn't blink an eye. That dude, like he doesn't get, only thing he gets emotional about is his mom and his wife.
Yeah. Like,
like when McGregor badmouthed his wife, like he can't even comprehend how that would be okay.
Dude, when Conor started talking trash about the dad, his dad passes away, and he's like, I was like, dude, like I'm all for the Muhammad Ali, Floyd Mayweather, like the trash talking that is professional fighting. I just think that all of a sudden when you start insulting a man's, passed away father, or his religion, or his mother, like that's, I don't know. I mean, there's other ways to do it, and I think McGregor showed some really just bad form on that. But I mean, yeah, McGregor's a fucking mess. I was just with Boss Rutan, and we were just kind of what was cool was we, since made friends with Boss. I mean, he's incredible in terms of fighting, and he's the original mixed martial arts guy. But his leg locks and just his knowledge of submissions is really cool. So to be able to kind of introduce him to Victor and the team and kind of get him to kind of mentor those guys. But we were actually rapping a little bit about the fight game, and he was, he's like, yeah, there's guys like Connor and that, and they want to talk all this trash. He's like, I just like to tell the truth. And he's like, usually fighters that are confident and they've trained a lot, they just tell the truth and, just tell people you're going to go out and do what they do and then go back it up. We know your health and wellness are a priority. That's why we partnered with Stay Classy Meats. They are dedicated to connecting you with the finest, responsibly raised meats on the planet. Their direct partnerships with farmers and ranchers mean they can deliver to you nationwide. They're more than a meat company. They're a network of athletes and farmers committed to superior nutrition. Stay Classy works with producers like R.C. Carter, whose regenerative agricultural practices result in beef that's packed with 75% more essential amino acids, phytonutrients, and a perfect blend of omega-3/6 ratio. Experience a difference with their 10-pound ground beef or 15-pound assorted meat subscription box, specially branded as the Stay Classy Power Athlete box. Click on the link and order today with the promo code Power Athlete, all one word. Join us in securing your health and food supply chain. Stay Classy Meats, superior nutrition, naturally. It's time to step up your game. Stay classy with us. Connor, through shit talking, created obviously an amazing brand, sold it for a ton, was able to transition into boxing to go fight, and he went 10 rounds with Floyd Mayweather, probably, I don't think probably the best fighter in the last 100 years, but here Mike Tyson call him probably one of the best fighter in 100 years. That was pretty impressive. So I'm kind of amazed with as much as he's created to see him kind of tarnish his image as badly as he's done. And it's just, I'm fucking blown away. Whereas, Khabib and these guys, they hold it down. They have a ton of respect, and they, their image and how they're viewed is so important that they wouldn't do anything to do it. And the fighters that come in their camp all have the same kind of attitude, and it's cool to see.
It was interesting when I was there in May. My assistant coach, Michael Din, said he was so impressed because Khabib was showing the Russians I had met before, how the Muslims, how to touch me. He's like, they will, if they see me, they'll reach their arm out, but they touch me in a certain way. But they don't touch, all women, the women that they know from AKA, that they're that way with, but they actually are so concerned that we'd be respected, that I'd be respected, that they tell people. And I imagine because I'm not in my 20s or 30s anymore, people, they're a little more comfortable with me, but they are, and they always ask me, oh, wasn't Khabib going to go back and fight? You don't understand. He told his mother. And they're like, so? I'm like, yeah, I know. You probably lied to your mother your whole life. It has, but I certainly lied to my mother some. So, I get it. But Khabib, he has not. And when they say it, they mean it. They do not go back.
I'm sad he's not going to fight. I liked watching him. When he had McGregor in that choke in the corner of the cage, and he's like, you want to talk now? You want to talk now? And then when he submitted him, then got up and he was basically I can't believe I can't believe you tapped in front of your people. And he's like, if my father was in the crowd, I would have never tapped. I would sooner die than that. I appreciate those guys. Just the fact that they do that, but it makes sense. I've heard a little bit about, Khabib's father and how they've trained and, how he kind of runs the show. And it's kind of, it's definitely impressive to see people take it to that level. Believe me, the UFC and fighting, as a football player, I've always been a fight fan, a boxing fan. And, if you want to be considered the best in the world, these are where the toughest dudes in the world end up, squaring up. So, and that's what's really fascinating with the jiu-jitsu stuff, because you have guys that are, I'm the best ever. And I'm like, you want to be the toughest dude in the world, there's a few places you go. You either go to the UFC or go play in the NFL or get into professional boxing. And it's really those three. If you want the toughest people in the world, you got to fight Tyson Fury, try to go play in the NFL or join the UFC and see how tough you are.
Well, and I find that a lot of people, they don't really understand how hard it is to really be in something like the UFC, what the time it takes, what the effort is, what it's like to be a pro football player. I didn't grow up, my family were politicians, but I grew up around University of Kentucky basketball as a child. And back then, Joe B. Hall, and then I remember Adolph Rupp as a child. I mean, the amount of work that those people put in, and that's just college basketball.
Sure.
But fighters, people will say to me, why don't you date a fighter? I'm like, oh, it takes a certain kind of narcissism to be a fighter, because the amount of effort, you're up, you have to eat a certain way. You have to go to cryotherapy. You have to go to massage therapy. You have to, it's all day. It's a 24-hour-a-day gig that is not really inclusive of somebody else unless they're in your world. And people don't get it.
If you could design the perfect fighter, right? Like somebody that goes in like mixed martial arts. So they had to have, obviously, be able to strike. They got to be able to wrestle. They got to understand submissions and jits and catch wrestling and all these different kind of disciplines that the UFC has really evolved into. If you could design your perfect fighter from, let's say, Khabib and these guys growing up in it, like if you could do it, like how would you influence them? What would you lean on? And how would you kind of split their time?
Oof, that's a big question. So I believe that, the sequential muscle order, you learning to use your body effectively for sports you're going to partake in is important. So I would want to teach them by sequential muscle order and say, and if you were competing in jiu-jitsu, this would be how you would finish, or this is where it's applied. And if you're striking, this is where it's applied. Or if you're going to wrestle, this is where it's applied. So if I get somebody who's a striker and I'm trying to teach them how to wrestle and I want them to use their muscles in a certain order, I will literally strike them, usually in the arm or chest, but I'm really strong. So I'll just strike them without tightening my muscles. Then I'll let them watch as I pull my muscles in a certain order, and then I'll strike them again. And they're like, please don't ever hit me again with your bare knuckles. But sometimes you have to explain to these people, a lot of martial arts is taught by somebody great, once did it this way, and that's why you have to do it. I think if you teach them why, you show them how, and you explain sequential muscle order, then how it's applicable across the mixed martial arts that you have knowledge of. And I don't have knowledge of all of them, but I can, I do have enough to be helpful. Then that person is excited, because before, like when people come to AKA and they say, these fighters practice twice a day. They only wrestle twice a week. They spar twice a week. They do jiu-jitsu on their own. They have private boxing lessons, etc. And I'm like, well, really, if you spend 2 hours a week moving your muscles in this way, it's applicable to all those other things. So now go learn with more control and more effectiveness than you had before. I think that's why people or fighters, still people come to me, is because I can help them. And then when they go back and they want to learn, from like somebody like Boz or Victor, they're able to do it better. They're not just trying to mimic a piece of technique. It's almost multidimensional to me. So when you look at something and, you look at a dollhouse, like if you have a daughter, they have the open face dollhouses, and on the first floor, they have the kitchen, and the second floor is like a bedroom, and the third room is the attic. And they have a little kid playing in the attic, and a mommy and daddy putting a baby to bed here, and maybe somebody cleaning in the kitchen. I don't think people teach mixed martial arts and fighting that way. I think they just say, you're on this floor, and this is what you have to do. Climb up. This is completely different. Instead of trying to find the similarities and teach those first, so people feel like they're getting somewhere. I guess I should say, John, like I never saw sports as something to win. For me, growing up, my parents were politicians, and we were concerned with people in where I'm from, indigent care. My mom ran Kentucky's health department. My family was like about this, and everyone told me, because I was smart, I needed to be in politics. But I found the choices that people made to be uncomfortable for me in their personal lives and things, and the sort of usury that goes in politics. But wrestling and fighting, Like, to me, if I can help somebody use their body correctly and know that they're not dependent on somebody else, and then it turned out I ended up being a good coach, my life's a work of art.
Can you dig a little deeper into this sequential muscle order? Like
Yes.
believe me, I love to go deep and get as granular as possible, but you keep talking about it. I'm fascinated. I'd love to learn more.
So typically when a wrestler moves forward, you'll see them. So often when they're first taught, John, they're taught to sprawl backwards, right, to avoid a shot. And they're taught to hold their hands out and keep their legs away. So it's all taught about defense. So, because they don't want people to quit. If they get taken down a bunch, they're probably going to quit. If their leg keeps getting snatched and they get single leg, low single to the ground, they're going to quit. But if you move forward in a specific order of muscle usage, the strength of your body and the position of your body makes you unsusceptible to being snapped. It makes you unsusceptible to someone snagging your leg. And the typical order of that is the trail leg is your calf and your hamstring with a 90-degree angle, and then your lead foot, heel, toe, knee. And once I could just start teaching that, I was working with some jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai jiu-jitsu guys the other day, just for like 20 minutes. And they said, I've learned more today than I've learned in 6 years of being associated with wrestling and mixed martial arts, because I just don't know all that other information. Mm-hmm. But I see what's supposed to happen. So if you know Henry Cejudo or any of those guys, they'll tell you. Like the first time I worked with Muhammad, who I think Victor beat the last time they competed against each other, he posted a picture of me with him. Within 3 minutes, Henry Cejudo called. Eric Albersayan called. They're like, that's the coach you need forever. She's the coach you need forever. Stay with her. And, they know that I know. When Henry beat, years ago, Angel, Henry's brother, wanted me to come coach at Fight Ready, do a clinic. And when we were there for UFC Glendale or something, and Henry didn't want to have anything to do with me. He's like, yeah, I don't have anything to do with this woman. I'm a Mexican male and I don't want to hear it. So, but Angel's like, no, you got to hear her. So they did this promo video. Me and Angel are smiling. Henry's like looking up, ignoring my ass the whole time. Hilarious. The next day I start coaching, maybe 5 minutes in, he said, stop. He said, I want you to help me. And we had a long talk about why I thought he was losing to Demetrius over and over. And after he beat Demetrius, it was that same fight I was describing with Askren and Jorge. We were back afterwards. They take you back to this room where you get food and stuff and watch the fights until you get on the buses. He came in and they were trying to hustle him out. And he said, no, I got to tell my coach something. He said, Coach, as a Mexican male, and you never wrestled, I didn't want to have anything to do with you. But you changed my perspective and my career. And I'm grateful. And all I tried to tell him was that he wasn't moving his muscles when he was transitioning from one mixed martial arts to the other. So he would go in, if you watch the early fights with Demetrius, he would go in, Demetrius would pull guard, Henry would back out. He'd move like twice, come back out twice, 3 times. I'm like, Henry, you've got to move 7 to 11 times because that'll take you across, the diameter of the mat. And he was like, I don't think I feel that. I said, well, it's the order in which you're using your muscles and how you're training those muscles. I mean, people lift in wrestling, and then they go out, and after the first period, they have this huge, thick lactic sweat, and they have no push, and they're standing up in their stance, and they get taken down 6 times in the next period and lose. You can lift all you want. If you can't, muscles can't maintain, if your aerobic and anaerobic thresholds aren't maintaining where in the position you need to be successful to win against the other person's body structure, you're doing a lot of training unnecessarily, in my opinion.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market.
We've built our online training business by partnering with Train Heroic and helping us deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training.
And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best tech and training, go to trainheroic.co/powerathletehq. And now back to the show.
So really what you're hoping to do, it's, man, it's pretty interesting. I viewed football very similarly, where the person that could maintain posture and position in their technique longer than the other person was the person that won. So I remember when I had this observation, I'm like, wait a minute, if I can just maintain my technique through space longer than the other guy, I won't lose. All right. Then it was like, okay, now I have to understand what perfect technique is, and now I have to be able to move through space in relation to them while maintaining posture and position. And so then like it really changed my like perception of training, where now all of a sudden it wasn't about the weight or all this other stuff. It was really just about sharpening the blade so that I could effectively go do it. And so then you end up like, well, that doesn't really translate to what I'm trying to do, where it probably sounds very, very similar. And as you keep talking about heel toe, knee, now you're talking about knee over the toe with a positive shin angle, which allows you to be, because you can't sprint and you can't run, you can't generate force unless your knee's over your toe, back leg, and all of a sudden now you're talking about probably an angle where their chest is over the knee. And then as they're able to kind of strike through, position hands, probably thumbs up instead of this way. I mean, all of these different positions you end up figuring out because you can absorb and project load and drive through an individual better, which, happens in football. But the one thing which I figured out too, which is at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, how great you are. If you're not in good shape and you can't repeatedly be able to push these efforts, it doesn't matter. I mean, I watch guys that were the most gifted, most talented, that should have literally wiped the floor with me. But just for the mere fact that they weren't in good shape, they couldn't continue to play at the same high level, which is pretty interesting. I mean, you watch these fighters. I mean, the guys that are in shape, the guys that can continue to fight at such a high level. But then, like you were saying, you bring it up Masvidal, where all of a sudden he caught Ben with that knee right in the face. I mean, how do you even prepare for that one, other than the fact that maybe you see fight tape and see him practicing it?
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of times people sort of live in this, even people who want to be professional fighters, they associate, I don't know if it's life experience or age for me, but they think that if you've achieved something once, then you deserve a break. And then you go back and start again. I'm like, what planet does that work? I mean, like you're going to get an A on the first half of algebra, then not go to class for 3 weeks and think you're going to get an A on the next test, or you're in shape and then you're dramatically out of shape. I'm not talking like, you had a piece of cake for your child's birthday or you did something else, but I mean, just fall apart. Just fall apart, feel like they deserve. And I don't understand where that comes from. As a coach, I don't feel that. I mean, I don't think I get to, have a bunch of guys win or a bunch of women win something and then not have to be responsible.
Is it because they don't fight enough? In the NFL, we play every Sunday. So you got 6 days to get ready to play on that 7th.
I think it's more with kids in wrestling or college athletes in wrestling. I think it's partially generational. I don't know how old you are, but I'm old enough to, have lived through things that other people haven't. And I certainly, whereas my parents being national politicians money wasn't an issue in my family in any means. But I worked in high school. My parents I didn't get to get my hair highlighted as a 15-year-old. I didn't do those things. And I think a lot of people think that they're going to do a certain amount of work and get a reward. And some people think it's overeating or getting out of shape. And some people think it's going to be attention at a nightclub from women or men. And some people think they're going to be cooler at school, or Flow Wrestling is going to put their, dirty flow move of the week was their scramble, in the finals of a tournament. But I think the most successful guys, like really Khabib, has no guile. He has he doesn't even know what the word coy means. He's not even, sometimes he tries to be funny, like when he's picking on Daniel or Javi or someone, but he's like, coach, this shit, no. Why McGregor call my wife a goat fucker?
Yeah.
Like he doesn't get it. And I think that's missing in what you're describing to me, you, who I don't know well at all, except for today, is to say, you seem like someone to me that could probably take the skill sets you've used in football. Oh, you have. Now you've become a great jiu-jitsu coach. Oh, you have. And now you've got this successful, power athlete and who you are. You've taken that same, you weren't looking for a break. You didn't expect the football to be the end all. And look what you've done. And I don't think that's prominent. I don't think that's prominent. And that's why I try so hard to teach youth and college people those things, and even fighters, because they think it's like, some fighters are like, oh, well, my girlfriend broke up with me. I'm like, okay, well, lots of things happen. So-and-so lost a baby last week. Get your gloves back on. I mean, I'm not trying to be insensitive, but that's, you have to power through some stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have to persevere. I'll correct you. I'm not a jiu-jitsu coach in any way. But the thing that I understand is athleticism, and I understand how to make people really strong, really explosive, and how to move through space and do shit that other people can't. I did it during my NFL career, and I've spent the last 10 plus years doing this for, hundreds of thousands of people around the globe. So it was really fascinating when, and it was totally fortuitous the way I got involved in it. Shanji, who's Victor's coach, we ended up meeting just because I took my daughter to do jujitsu. And we met through a mutual friend. I took her up there, and then after watching her do jits for, probably a month, Shanji, I think, mentioned my name to somebody, was like, hey, this former NFL player brought his daughter. And I think the guy's comment to him is like, yeah, dude played in the NFL, but that's not what people know him for. So then when he approached me, hey, can you help me work with these kids? And I call them kids because obviously they're younger than me. But these,
right, I say that too.
And his comment about Victor was he has a very unique, special style of jiu-jitsu. He moves like a 150 pound guy at 250 pounds. And he's been plagued by injuries, and he could really benefit. And I was like, well, bring him in. So he showed up with his training partners, and I was absolutely blown away by one, not only how nice they were, but how hardworking and how they wanted to be the best, but also how legitimate strength conditioning, as I understand it, in terms of like a professional athlete, NFL player, like really high level stuff, hadn't made its way to jiu-jitsu in the fight game. I mean, the UFC, yes, but just in jits, not really. And seeing what they thought being in shape was and being strong and how they understood it was like 20 years, 30 years ago from what I understood. And I was like, man, this is wild. Like, these guys are just at a knowledge deficit. So then bringing them in, starting to work with them, teaching about rotational force, how to generate power, how to be strong, bilateral, unilateral, hip extension, the knee behind the glute, which is the position they're in when they're in a single leg or double leg, like whenever they're striking. But yet people don't teach it that way. I'm watching them do single leg work, and I'm like, the knee's got to be behind the glute, because if you think about sprinting, like, you can't get hip extension unless the knee's behind the glute. So I mean, just some of these basic positions, teach and be strong in all different planes of motion, and then all of a sudden, like, making sure that they're in good enough shape, but then also realizing, like, what I do is supplemental. Like, at the end of the day, they don't get paid to lift weights. They get paid to do what they do on the mat. So then if the training doesn't make them better or takes away from what they're doing on the mat, then obviously it's not benefiting them. So making sure they're in shape, making sure, like, you're managing volume and intensity and all these other things so that they can go out, and then being smart enough to talk to their coaches that know what the fuck they're doing. Are they better? Are they able to do things that they weren't able to? And Shunji was like, yes, they're really annoying. Like, I'm not looking forward to going with them because they're big and strong and they move well. So then all of a sudden realizing, like, okay, we're headed in the right direction, and then obviously, Victor goes out and, wins double gold at Brazil and then also at Worlds, and just, smashes people. And the comment somebody said to me, just that I didn't know, was like, he looks like an NFL player out there. And like, these other guys look like, not like, I mean, I was like, well, yeah, I mean, look at who his coach is. But that was a huge compliment, where he looked big, he looked athletic, and he moved through space well, because that, that's what the training forces him to do. So it's been really a lot of fun, but then also humbling myself to go learn their sport. So then I have an intrinsic knowledge of it. Like, that was a big thing. Like, I'm like, I just thought it was disingenuous that if somebody comes to you and I don't know about your sport, then I should humble myself to do it. And then realizing, like, fuck, I don't like any of this, but I'm still going to go do it because I need to. And then not having any ego about it. Like, I'm totally fine to suck. I've long subscribed to the idea that, like, if you can humble yourself and be okay with sucking at something after you've been really good at something, like, that's like the greatest form of, like, whether it be like neuroplasticity or just being humble enough to learn something new. I think that's growth to me. That's that's staying young forever, is the fact that I can learn a new skill. Whereas I meet people all the time where they're so rigid, they're so like just like lack neuroplasticity, where they're so crystallized, where they can't, their ego is so highly tied to something that they can't go and learn something new, and they can't humble themselves for it. And like, if I can't learn something from somebody, I just fucking should just end it right now. And so it's just been a different way.
I feel very similarly. When I first went to AK, Javier Mendez said on, well, I don't know, some podcast, he said that I came from, I don't think I said a word for 8 months, John. I just sat on the floor. I was the first one in and I was the first one to leave. I didn't ever ask for a picture. I didn't try to, make friends with anybody. I just watched. And then finally one day I saw something. I said, hey, are you trying to do this the way Daniel? They said, yes. I said, actually, I think if you would you be open to doing it like this or this? And I'm like, oh, that's, so much better. I didn't even pretend like I had any idea. And I don't even pretend like, I know everything about anything. It just doesn't work to be that person, to be that, as you said, disingenuous. You have to go in and learn.
Well, I think athletes are really good too, especially high level athletes. They see through the bullshit really quick. And they realize fairly quickly if somebody gives them information that actually they can apply immediately, and they see a result. Like I just spent the last couple of days out in Salt Lake City with Boss and Victor. I took them out to see. There's a doctor out there named Craig Bueller, and Dr. Bueller has a technique that's called AMIT, Activated Muscle Integration Technique. And he's able to work with. He's worked with Olympic gold medalists. He's worked with some of the best athletes in the world. And what he's able to do is go through and assess the body and figure out when muscles aren't firing due to neurological inhibition from injury. And then he's able to go through balance and then get things to fire that haven't. And Victor had a back injury.
That's cool.
Oh, it's next level. When people use the term performance enhancing, it's as physically close to anything as performance enhancing, where an athlete cannot do something. And it was really changed my paradigm on injuries when I met Dr. Bueller, because I would see people not be able to do stuff. And I thought that either they didn't want to, or they physically weren't strong, or they just couldn't neurologically do something because they weren't athletic enough. And then after meeting Dr. Bueller, I realized that people aren't able to do stuff or various movements because the body won't allow you to go into a range of motion or do something that it can't create stability. So your body, you can't get into position if you can't develop stability, and the body won't let you go there due to whether it be neurological inhibition from the muscles not firing. So all of a sudden we'd get into the training and I'd be like, shit, they can't do this stuff. And after meeting Dr. Bueller, I just make a note, be like, they can't do this. And I write Craig's name next to it. So then I called Doc Bueller and I was like, hey, I have an athlete can't get into hip extension. And if they were lay on their stomach and I need them to lift their leg off the ground, they only go 4 inches. And he's like, well, it's neurological inhibition from this and this. And the only person I know in the world that can fix this stuff is Dr. Bueller. So I took Boss and I took Victor out there and just handed them like, hey, here's what we've seen in the training, and watch Dr. Bueller work his magic on these guys. And that's a very interesting piece for me, where you can watch somebody not be able to do something and then shortly thereafter be able to do something. And, there's a lot of people like, I don't know, but when you bring in high level athletes that see a change in real time, like I couldn't do this and now I can do this, or I was losing because of this. Now you've given me new information and now I'm not losing. Like those guys just like they don't have ego about it. They just don't want to fucking lose. And they want to be the best. And so I think when you find people in those regards where, hey, if I'm not doing something right and you don't tell me, I'm more pissed at you than I am at me. It's almost like if you have,
and they should be.
Yeah. Like if you have intrinsic knowledge that can make me better and you're not telling me, I'm more mad at you. Like, dude, like I don't have any ego about this. If I'm not doing it right and you know a better way, show me. Because at the end of the day, I just want to win. And,
why didn't you tell me?
Yeah. Why didn't you tell me? Which, but then, and then you're talking about balancing fragile egos, which, coaches, which is a really interesting term for me, because the way that I think about the term coach is coach was usually somebody wearing shorts screaming at me when I was working in the 100-degree heat, at football camp. So like I've always had this really tumultuous feeling whenever people call me a coach. I'm like, ooh, usually coaches are dudes that are watching me work. So So it's been funny that these guys will call me coach, and I'll be like, yo, man, you got to find a better name, because I'm going to go train with you guys. I'm still going to do this stuff. Coaches are usually people that can't. So then, but they have a different perception of coach. But it's been really a lot of fun to learn and to apply what I know, because for me, when I think about athleticism and like the paradigm, and especially the blueprint for athleticism and athletes, I think about people standing on their feet and like combatives on the feet. And then what's been really fascinating with like the jits and the wrestling is now you're almost like a gyroscope, where these guys are like on their backs, moving in different positions, fighting here. You know, they start on their feet, they transition. So it's almost this like 360-degree athlete, which I never really thought about, because it was outside the realm of what I did in terms of like, you know, track and field, football, rugby, these other sports. So it's added a really interesting piece. But since I started working with these guys, watching the UFC and seeing the complete fighter, I'm just really fascinated by like the hierarchy of like skills and how people arrange their fighting. You know, certain guys are strikers, good guys are boxers, other guys are ground and pound. I mean, I was watching all the 30 for 30 stuff with Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, and you know, they were you know, it was really fascinating just seeing like the different styles that people have gone into, and really the evolution of the UFC. And then I was pulling up some stuff where they were saying that like, you know, now the most dominant UFC fighters come from a wrestling background. And so I you know, it's mainly because probably wrestling's hard.
There's a lot of people who will come to AKA and they show up on spar day, you know, live day, whatever. And I never seen them at any wrestling practice. And I'll say to Ron Kessler, I said, oh, do they come to jiu-jitsu? He's like, don't know him. You know, like they don't want to put in, you know, they don't want to put in the work. And the wrestling takes a lot of work. It's a lot of effort over and over. And, you know, back to what you were saying about people being open, I found that the better fighters, the better coaches are thrilled if I can come and see something in, you know, 20 minutes and then show them some sequential muscle order and how to do that. And then they make it better. And then some want me to start with someone from the very beginning, which I'm happy to do also, but I can do both. And I think that makes a huge difference for people in trusting and wanting to do stuff. But there's some people who feel they should just say what they want the athlete to do, but without taking the time to prove it. I sort of feel like we have a Consumer Reports on wrestling. You know, we get a bunch of good wrestlers together, been at a lot of information given to them in terms of technique. And then we put together the best math-based opposition we can find in a body position and see which of the technique works. If it doesn't work, you know, throw it out and let's just, you know, stay with the ones that do. And I think sounds like what you're doing too, but just different terms than what I say or what I see. The thing that's interesting for me is that is the continuation process. So when I start working with someone, or I've worked with someone for a while, I can see where they can actually go next once they've gotten control of the use of their body at one level, and then move to the next and move to the next. I get a lot of athletes who are losing because they're dependent on their athleticism over proper technique or proper sequential muscle order. So they just want to, just like you're describing when you were saying they're lifting up the leg, it would only come 4 inches. I try to get them to use a piece of technique. They go, my body doesn't work that way. They'll say, my body doesn't work that way. I said, no, you can actually back bend and run the floor and back flip. You just have to use your muscles in a certain order and overcome your fear. And then once we practiced the first time, and I said, how many things today did you do that you didn't know you could do?
Yeah. 20.
I'm like, wonder if every day is like that. If you're just open, right? What will you really accomplish? And, you know, that's what's exciting, is teaching someone. It's different than an injury, but teaching someone that they turn their hands, you know, right hand to 11, left hand to 1, you know, ears between your bicep, how that extends the power of the 45-degree angle between the quad and the torso, and a tripod position. I mean, just, you know, and they do it and they're like, oh my gosh, I lost so many times. But here's the thing, John, you've got to tell me, if you have this, I will go to work with an athlete and I'll say, can you tell me in your last 6 fights, can you tell me in your last 6 matches, What percentage of your shots did you finish in the first period, and what were they? No historical knowledge. I did venture capital for years and turnarounds, and I need every piece of historical information: what product sold, what product didn't, what got returned, what was the commission base, how much money did the company have to put in for the product? People don't know. And I suspect you do know about your NFL career and people. I think that's so important.
Yeah, no, I mean, in the NFL, watching tape and knowing your opponents is second to none. Like, I mean, you do so much film study. I mean, to the point where, they would make you cut ups on your guys, and like that piece was vitally important. What's more fascinating to me, working with the JITS guys, is they don't do that the same. Like, for example, like, Gordon Ryan, who, claims to be the best, ever. He has all these different tapes, right? So he sells a bunch of, BJJ Fanatics tapes. As an NFL player, I would purchase them all, and I would watch every one of them. And I'm sure there's things that he's working on that's not in the tapes, but like, if you're going to give away all this information, like, why wouldn't you learn as much as you can from that individual? I was actually telling Victor this recently. They were asking me about certain players that I played against. And I like a guy's name that they brought up that I won't mention. But I was like, he was all right. But it wasn't as if, like, when the schedule got released, everybody would go look at the schedule and you kind of circle different teams because you knew that, like, you were going to have to prepare for these 3 or 4 games above everybody else. I'm going to see this guy that's the best to ever do it, and I got to go against John Randall. I got to go this guy, and you kind of circle and make little notations, and then you knew certain weeks, like, even though this guy's got a big name, I'm not worried about playing against this guy. And you would do, ample study, but it's not as if you're, tearing the guy's picture out of the program and like putting it up on your wall, because you knew that, like, if I can go out and do the job I need to do, then like this is going to guarantee me, glory in the future. So what's fascinating for those guys is, and I think at some point, and jiu-jitsu is kind of interesting. It's kind of like a slow grow. It's a very fast growing sport, and it's kind of growing, with like the UFC and wrestling and all this, even though wrestling's been huge. But I'm with the Title IX stuff, I'm really excited too about women's wrestling, because it's going to save men's wrestling. And it's just been, it's a world that I didn't necessarily know access until recently. But at some point, like wrestlers, those JITS guys are going to just start having cut-ups, and they're going to watch film, and they're going to know their opponents so well. And they're also going to realize, hey, people are doing the same to me. So now I have to continue to develop my skill. And there's certain things that I'm going to have to break out new that I hadn't shown before. And we used to, as much as we watched other people, we also watched ourselves to see what our tendencies are. And then, we were always great with other teammates being like, like, what are your coaches saying about me? Oh, this is what the scouting report on you is. Okay, well, those are my wheelhouse. What other skills do I have? What else am I not going to show? So I think at some point that cerebral piece will enter, and maybe it has. But I think for guys like Victor and this that, are in that kind of upper echelon, I think film study, knowing your opponents, and not just going in, slapping hands and seeing what they throw at you, but actually having like a certain, like you said, like having a game plan in place. And, but it's also this open loop deal where it's not like gymnastics, where I know what I have to do on the beam. I know what I have to do on the floor. You're going, and this, what I call or I can't remember where we got it from, but it's closed loop versus open loop, where closed loop is, I know it's exactly what's asked of me, like shooting a free throw, opposed from open loop, where I don't know what's going to happen, and I have to, move in relationship to another athlete. But, I mean, the fight game, I mean, there's a reason why, boxing and wrestling were in the original Olympic Games, because they've always been like foundations of culture and society. And you actually, in our emails back and forth, one of the topics to discuss that you shot out that I circled, which is great, which is the role of combat sports in the makeup of a productive society and workforce, and its valuable role in raising children. I thought that was a incredible topic to discuss, and extremely well written, and would love to discuss that.
Yes, I think that so many people go out into life without a plan. without self-confidence, without knowing what they can and can't do, trying to please people who's they're not really responsible for that person's happiness, that it sort of causes people to paralyze up and they don't become who they can and what they should be. A combat sport where you have to attack or defend or both is so like life. And that kids these days, are taught that everything is sort of equal or everybody should be the same, or I don't know. It's just very hard for me to stomach. When I was in the workforce, I was pretty direct. And then the next generation coming up was saying, oh, you shouldn't be so direct. I'm like, well, it's going to take a lot less time if I'm direct than if I'm not. What do you want me to do? Well, that sort of hurt my feelings. Well, what part hurt your feelings? The evidence shows that this is the best result. I mean, we're talking sales or forecasting, and they would get so frustrated, by that. And the fact that all things are relatively equal, gender and weight. And you can have somebody throwing advice at you, but it's really up to you to decide what you want to do while you're out there. And you're not going to win them all, and you're not going to lose them all. And you can't ride that emotional roller coaster. My daughter wore this to school today, and she came home and she was sad because Susie said it made her, look bad, or that was out of style, or came from JCPenney. And then we have this whole group of people that, matriculate into adults whose emotional stability and decision-making has been gyroscoped around by things that really don't matter. And they more easily fall apart and are less effective as parents and caring for other people and being effective.
Well, the one thing that sports, there's two things. One, being good at sports and being able to rise to let's say an upper echelon to play at a high level or compete at a high level. There's no way anybody just grants you that. There's no amount of money that buys it. I mean, I guess if let's say you're a baseball player and you want to be a great baseball player and your dad has a ton of money and hires incredible coaches early on, you could probably develop a certain skill set, but no amount of money is going to make you a high level Division I wrestler who wins a national championship. I mean, there's no amount of money that's going to buy your way into the NFL. It just doesn't happen. It's like the other one I always tell my kids too, probably the greatest flex is actually being in good shape, like being muscular and being in good shape. I'm like, there's no way to buy that either, because it takes hard work. And, people are like, oh, what about performance enhancing drugs? I'm like, you still have to do the work. It's not like we haven't figured out the Captain America deal where they just, inject you with a bunch of shit, put you in a fucking, pot of electricity. And next thing you know, you're jacked. I mean, the day that comes, I guess we can change that statement. But I remember a quote, and I don't know who to attribute it to, so I'll probably just steal it. But it's, if you knew how fast people forget your name when you die, you'd really give no fucks about what people think about you when you're alive. And, that's an interesting statement where, we allow a whole bunch of people that are not have any bearing on our lives, basically, somehow, dictate these things. And I was thinking back on my own experience. I tried never to read the papers, never did. I've reviewed sports writers as like their job is to create drama on this. And I remember one time I heard a statement about me and it ended up kind of changing the way I viewed something and ended up making almost a less intelligent decision because I didn't want to prove the guy right or, the guy right. And I did something dumb and it ended up, negatively affecting me. And I remember thinking like, shit, if I had never seen that, I would have never made that decision. So you have a whole bunch of people who don't have a vested interest in your best foot forward or your best survival or your best interest, making observations and claims. I mean, look at the fight game. Like a whole bunch of people that have never put on gloves a single fucking day, as nobody's ever been punched in the face, who, have a YouTube channel or social media that are, making all these things. Like I said, I'm watching this deal about, the Dagestani fighter pulling out, and the guy's like, oh, it could be performance enhancing. And he's basically doing it for the clicks when, everybody knows the guy got hurt. And we know with those fighters that if they get hurt, they're not going to go into the fight hurt because it doesn't allow them to be able to put their best product forward. So they rather pull out of the fight and come fight another day, then have a bad showing and bring dishonor. I mean, that's well established, and yet this guy's still throwing the steroid accusation at it. I'm like, fuck that guy. You know, and that guy has, you know, that guy's never fucking done it. It's like in pro football.
I'm sure that's hobby too.
Yeah, like, but in pro football, same thing. Like, you'd meet these sports writers that, like, physically, Jason Whitlock's a great example. He was one of our sports writers in Philly. I mean, he was in awful shape, and he was, we've since become friends and whatnot. And he's been on the podcast, but like, dude, I mean, his whole deal, and he even said it, like, I was writing to be polarizing, and I used to, you know, say some ugly shit about people because that's what people wanted to do, you know. But as a young athlete, you don't have the wherewithal to understand, you know, that you're just a pawn in this game that you don't even want to play in. And instead of being like, I'm just not going to read anything. So, but I mean,
I had that experience as a child, but not from athletics, but from politics. So my parents were in a very influential situation in a state where a large amount of the people work for the state government, and people would treat me well or not well, depending on whether or not they were happy with a decision that one of my parents had made. And I always saw that when I first started coaching wrestling, I would see that these kids were susceptible to things people were saying, and it really disturbed me. You know, I didn't want them to be in that situation. I wanted them to learn that they could control their own fate and destiny, and whether they were going to go to college didn't matter what all these other people said or thought, and that they could, you know, move forward and be successful. When I first started working with the athletes, it wasn't because I saw something. It was because someone said to me, if you would help them write their applications, especially like some kids from Watsonville and parts of outside of the Bay Area that's not, you know, economically advantageous. A lot of the parents are migrant workers and things. Then I'll introduce you to the college coaches. So I really started out sort of ancillary, and then I saw what I saw on it, and it turned into something. But you know, trying to convince people not to pay attention to what other people think is important. And I get a lot of grief because I'm a female, and even though I don't think I look it, I'm 60. But I can still hand fight and beat up most men. You can ask any of them. They don't want to throw hands with me. They don't want me to 2-on-1 them. They don't want me to grab them. But I have to eat and be a certain way every day that my friends my age are not doing. They're getting hip replacements and stuff, and I'm on my 3rd protein shake. And, you know, I'm at an age where I'm not going to look like I did when I was 30, no matter what I do.
Sure.
And so I have to be strong. I have to be able to grab someone and them go, oh, crap. Even one time I went out to dinner and met Daniel at dinner with some people on Capitol Hill, and they were all laughing after I shook their hand. I said, what's so funny? I said, Daniel said you would be the strongest handshake he'd ever felt. And people will say to me, you know, why are you trying to hurt someone? I'm not trying to hurt someone. That's my arm strength, because I cannot be effective at helping kids and then, you know, fighters and stuff, unless they can feel the pressure from my hands and my legs. And, you know, people don't like that, but that's true.
Like your range, I mean, obviously you work with high level wrestlers, you're working with high level MMA and UFC fighters and kind of this whole huge cascade, but then it also folds down to working with kids in summer camp. You said that you're in the process of working with kids in camp. I mean, what's the age range, and kind of how does that whole deal fit?
So it normally starts with, we'll have this past 3 weeks, we've had wrestlers from all over. Some are nationally ranked. They're just competed in a All-American or won at Fargo at the high school national Olympic style championships, freestyle and Greco. And then we'll have a 5-year-old. So I teach by the muscle order, John. So I teach everybody the muscle order. And even if you've been coming for 7 or 8 years, like the very better high school and college athletes have, they still learn something new because it's organic. You know, like they're at that next level. I can show them something different in their movement that they couldn't have encapsulated before. So I teach by movement, then we divide them up by skill set and what they're interested in. Like, well, you just had a jiu-jitsu guy here from Scotland. So I taught him the sequential muscle order. I was working with the guys that were going to Fargo, but then I had someone else teach him the finishes, how it applied to jiu-jitsu. And then I worked with the other athletes, or we have little kids who are learning, 5-year-olds are learning how to do this muscle order, and they're just trying to shoot and take someone down, John, you know, and we go, oh, yeah, you know, But when I slow it down in video and say, look, can you see Harry and Chrissy doing that here in this match? Or can you see Islam in that fight where he had his hips over his knees? That's the same thing. You're using it here, but one day you may use it there. They get so excited because it doesn't seem like, a lot of people say, well, how long have you been wrestling? Oh, 2 years. Oh, well, you can't be any good unless I was their coach or someone like me. Like they have this presumption that time is the determinant of effectiveness. So I work with people of all ages. Anybody's welcome. We usually lose about 10% after a couple of days. They're pretty sore. So we're asking them to use muscles they can't use. But people come, UFC fighters, people come and they don't care if they're working with a little person or a big person until we're actually sparring or doing something. So I start early. I have a home in Vegas. I could, or I have a residency in Vegas. I could just live there and do the fighters. But I really am concerned about people going to college. Jimmy Carter told me when I was a child that you enter school to learn, you leave to serve. And he actually wrote it in one of his books too. I think his mama had put it on top of their schoolhouse, or it was a plaque on their schoolhouse on their plantation, really a farm. But I really care. I really want these kids to go to school. We currently have about 375 athletes competing in college. And, I want them to do well in school. I want them to use the same skill set. I don't want to hear about how the teacher did them wrong or anything. They need to learn how to do schoolwork just like everybody else does. If you need extra help, you need extra help, right? That's the way it is. And, but I teach all ages and I love it.
And where's the camp? The camp's in Virginia?
Yes, sir. The camps are in Virginia this summer and in Manassas, Virginia. And then usually I do some in Montana and in Las Vegas and then in California. But this year we're just in Virginia. We have 2 more weeks left, the first 2 weeks of August. So we'll have a lot more athletes coming after the national championships. And then that's when the college guys come because they fulfilled their obligation to run and be counselors at their collegiate, the collegiate tournaments that most colleges have in order to fund their programs. So yeah, it's great. We have people come from everywhere.
No, I'm in the same boat. I had a gang of scholarship offers. I mean, I think I had a whole bunch even before I could drive. So the ability to, I was a good student, but obviously not good enough to get into Berkeley. So I got in playing football. But once you're there, then all of a sudden it's equal playing ground. But one of our greatest contributions, especially for what we do here at Power Athlete, is educating coaches, and the amount of kids that we've worked through their coaches that have gotten college scholarships and gone on and, win gold medals and played professional sports has been pretty high. And I always count those as some of the best because I was really lucky. Like I said, I got a scholarship. I didn't have to worry about that aspect. I got to go to a school that I would not have gone to, and I got it all paid for. And then I got to play a sport, which allowed me to go on and, play in the NFL for a decade. So anybody that I can give that opportunity to. But if people are interested in your camps, what's the best way? Is it at
wrestlingprep.com?
Wrestling Prep.
Under summer training programs, under training events.
Training events.
Wrestlingprep.com under training events, under summer. Or you can just reach out to me directly. A lot of people text me every day, and we're super excited to have people. I know that we have some people coming from the Netherlands and UFC. We have 2 UFC fighters that'll be at week 4 and week 5. But I think what I'm really proud about for this year, John, is that we had over 18% of people participated in week 1 or 2 who flew to us or flying back to us for weeks 4 and 5. So I think that says something. Or they're driving from Massachusetts to Virginia, 10 hours. And I think that says something. And it's a lot of people going to put this effort in to make these camps work. And we try to run them at low cost or no cost. We have a nonprofit, Friends of Wrestling Prep. And so if we have anybody, people should not look at the pricing and go, I don't think I can do that. They should just text me. And then my number and everything is on that website.
The pricing doesn't look very expensive.
It's not expensive.
I mean, an overnight deal for $475 registration for week 1 for an overnight camp. That's super reasonable.
We feed them all their meals too.
Yeah, that's Yeah, that's
No,
not
we're not.
expensive.
I'm not trying to make, it's funny. Sometimes people will say, oh, she's trying to make money off a kid. I don't really know who that kid would be.
No,
but,
and
what
you're
that
not.
money would be.
Yeah, you're not charging enough.
Yeah, right. I mean, that sort of makes me laugh. The camps, the other good thing about the wrestling prep camps is that we spend a huge amount of time teaching kids how to study, how to understanding what the collegiate process is to get into school, understanding consequences of poor decision making in high school and how that could affect how you're viewed, why it's important not to yoke up with people. I try to say to these boys, sometimes they'll all tell you, they'll get texts in the middle of the night and I'll take their phone and I'll text the girl back and said, this boy recently had a suspicious rash and he's not allowed to date until you finish high school and you can pay for yourself. He has better things to do than text with a girl who has nothing better to do in 2 a.m. than text some smelly boy at wrestling camp. And I explained to them, they're texting everybody else. You're not the only one. They just didn't get up in the middle of the night. They're just looking for attention. They're missing somewhere, and I'm sorry they're in that boat. But they're not hanging with us. Go to college, expand your horizons. Do not limit the funnel of opportunity. And if it's a good decision now, like if you're in love and you think it's going to last forever, it's going to last forever. But there's nothing you can do to make it about diminishing your opportunity that's going to make it last. It's going to be the opposite. So, that's, we spend a lot of time at wrestling prep teaching those kinds of things that other people either don't have enough, what's a college senior going to say? They're not married yet. They've not lost a parent. They don't know what life is all about. I'm not mad at them, but I take a lot of time. And when we have the downtime, I'm talking to all of them. I talk to all of them. I film all of them. I send their parents the film of what they did, how they started, where they went. Someone will try something and they can't do it. And I'm like, here, look how you did it better here. And I'll mark it up with a software program that shows them. I mean, it takes a lot of time and effort, but it's not that's not monetized. I do it because I love it. And I think it's important. And those kids who come back and say, I won my section, or I went to college because you convinced me I could do it. I exceeded all expectations of myself and that anybody else had of me. Man, that's the best. In fact, I might have worked with a kid who went to, it was an NCAA champ, but then, made some bad decisions and whatever. I mean, that's great. They're an NCAA champ. I love that. I love that the math of what I see works. And I love that every friggin' fucking hard knock I took for being a female or being older or having never wrestled paid off. But it's nothing like the kid who smiles and said, I have more confidence now. It's
incredible.
Hopefully they can pull that memory up again and apply it.
How come Texas, which I would think would be a hotbed for wrestling, doesn't have a Division I program in wrestling?
I don't know. There's a really good coach in Texas named Paul Schwab, a wrestling coach named Paul Schwab, who works with youth. And I work with his son, Joshua, and his wife, Lauren, is an OBGYN, and they live in Lubbock. And they're involved, I think, with something at Rice at trying to get D1 wrestling to Rice. I might be misquoting, but I know they're involved with trying to get D1 wrestling, to Texas. And there was a long time, a great Olympian who's now at the New Jersey Regional Training Center who coached out of Texas. But in Allen, Texas, in the past had a really good wrestling program. They may still, I don't know. I know they're great for football, but I don't really know. We just had a program added here at Marymount University, and that I'm really, really happy about. But I don't understand why D1 wrestling isn't more. I don't know. I don't know if it's because it just doesn't make money. I don't know. But it should be, because it's the only sport that there's no gender bias and no. I mean, football. I guess I'm assuming that most people play football are over a certain height, certain weight. I think most people who play basketball are over a certain height. At least, my brief observation says that that's true. Why would you not want a sport that was gender neutral, meaning both sports can do it? You just need some mats, so that's like maybe $80,000 worth of investments if you get mats that cover, you say you get 4 mats, 5 mats, brand new mats, a wrestling room one time. It's not an expensive sport.
Yeah, no, I'm blown away by it. Just the like my buddy Matt, he coaches at 3F here in Austin, and the fact that, because I asked him, I'm like, what are these kids? He's like, they all leave the state or they go play football. It's Sean Strickland said the same thing. He's like, until the money in the UFC and the fight game approaches like what we see in professional sports, we're not going to get the best athletes. I mean, he's like, can you imagine if, all these guys that are, these phenomenal NFL athletes decided to come fight? I mean, it was, John Jones's brothers, obviously NFL players. And like the comment was like, he was the worst athlete and the worst of the bunch. He's pretty damn good. And he didn't even wrestle. I mean, I know he wrestled, was in junior college, but he's considered, an absolute savage out there.
It's like
yeah, I mean, it's not like he wrestled, like my buddy Matt wrestled heavyweight at Cornell. But it's not like he wrestled at a Power 5 school and he's in there dominating the way he is. It's pretty interesting. It's
crazy.
Yeah.
Rob Cole loves Matt. He took the.
Oh yeah. Matt's great.
People in wrestling love Matt.
Yeah, he is. He is an interesting balance. I call him. So in jits, I joke that his style of jujitsu is called Captain Caveman Ooga Booga, because it's it's aggressive, flailing, flying. I mean, it's dude. As soon as we roll, I just go Ooga Booga the whole time, and it's a lot of fun for me. He's unbelievable. But yeah, it's been good. And what's great for me is his little boy's just a year or two younger than my little boy. So they'll come over and they wrestle and they both do jits and that. And I'm hoping that they get old enough to be able to go onto that wrestling program, just because I think it's so good. I mean, I grew up with 2 older brothers, so all we did was fight and battle. So by the time I, started fighting and, kind of got into that, I'd already been in a million street fights with my brothers. So it wasn't a big deal for me. But I think for these kids today, the hard work and the camaraderie and the community and that piece that connects with them, it's great. And it's also, with social media too and flow wrestling, it's so much more accessible. Like I was watching a bunch of, Gable Stevenson clips. I mean, so athletic, moves so well and so powerful. It's and the whole time I'm watching, I'm thinking like, how come this guy doesn't play football? And that's just, I mean, he's a world champ and, Olympic athlete and all this. And I'm watching him thinking, how come this dude doesn't play football? Which is such a funny thing. But when I see an athlete who moves that well and is that athletic and that strong and that powerful, instantly I think he should be an NFL player. And he probably missed his callings. He probably would have been a pretty good defensive tackle in the NFL.
Now, Gable Stevenson is a really great guy. That's for sure. I wanted to say something that you said when you were talking about your son and Matt's son. Is one of the things that I have to teach kids and even older kids is how to shove and how to push and how to knock someone down. Like they'll shoot at somebody, but they'll shoot to them and not through them. And for some reason, I had twin brothers that are 14 months younger than me. And my mom's family really did own a military school and a boys camp and junior college. So I was the only girl. So maybe I'm a little, rougher than average, but I have to teach people how to shove, how to shoot, what a combat sport is. And I think about that. I think the movie was called The 300. And, there's been a lot of books written about that time and those men. But they used to, when they would go to battle, they had, and I guess we saw some sort of amalgamation of that in Gladiator. They had these little figurines that made up their family. So before they would go to battle, they would put them all like in this little thing and they'd put it with their stuff. And they tie a certain string around it. They tie the string to their arm. So if they ended up finding their body, they would know who they were with their family. But they would, be reverent toward their family. They would kiss these people goodbye, tell them they loved them, and what they wanted for their future. Then they'd put them away and then they would go out and battle and leave that part of their demeanor and personality behind. And I think it's important for kids to understand that they can go on a mat, go in a ring, and that what's expected of them physically and mentally is different than how they're going to communicate in everyday life. And that's such a vital important part that people just don't get. And all these things blur. So if you can teach a kid early that this is this space, this is what you're allowed to do, this is how you do it. You knock the person down, you're putting them on their back, or jiu-jitsu, you're choking them out and fighting, whatever it is, that's what it is. And then the rest of your life, the kindnesses, the politeness, those things. I'm not saying be a bad sport, but it's a combat sport. That's what this is. That's how we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And then to make.
Well, and the crappy part is, so you have that one approach, but then you think about the thing that gets the most play on social media is Conor McGregor trying to throw a fucking table through, Khabib's bus, and the shit talking and this, and just like the lack of class, that I hate it. And I like McGregor. I mean, I think he's I'll forever respect him for the fact that he deviated outside when fought against Mayweather, which he still won 10 rounds with him, which to me is incredible. But like the fact that he still feels the insecurity that he has to act like that instead of, the guy's accomplished so much. Why not just be confident in that piece? But then he's doing all these, interviews where obviously he's coked out of his mind, which is like such a bad thing. And, unfortunately, he gets a ton of airplay out of it. And they tend to put a spotlight on like who's the loudest asshole in the room. And, like you said, like Gable Stevenson, like those kind of guys, like just classy. Like, oh yeah. I mean, dude, watching.
I remember back when Daniel first, I was at Daniel's last Strikeforce fight. I was in Oklahoma City. And then shortly thereafter, he fought in San Jose and in the UFC. And I think he thought that he had no reason not to think they would, but that, he'd been in San Jose a long time. He had a wrestling club, and the people would be for him and they booed him. And he was, I know him, like I could see that he was hurt, by that. And I remember thinking and saying to him, over time, who you are, you're going to be loved. Over time, people will see who you are. And people would talk to me about John Jones. My earliest experience with John Jones is having to rearrange everything we had arranged to go to a fight because he didn't meet the minimum requirements to be able to participate in the fight he signed on to do, i.e. failing a drug test or whatever the situation is. I'm not mad at John, but twice. And Daniel, it's not like Daniel's just taken Selena and somebody else. He takes his whole family. It's like a herd of people, 40, 50 people. And that's back when both of his parents were still alive. And people would say, oh, John Jones is my favorite fighter. I'm like, he couldn't even participate in 2 fights because he wasn't in the right condition. Who thinks, but John has, I've since met John and know John now, and John has evolved. He has evolved. When I think about McGregor, who I have not met, but have been, in his vicinity, I don't see somebody who has evolved. And I can tell you, like, the really great fight coaches that I know personally, like Henry Hoof, Javier Mendez, the guys from Jackson Winklejohn, I don't know them as well, but they're not the type of people where somebody who wasn't evolving would last, because they like tell it to you how it is when you're ready to hear it, and you just don't make it there. And McGregor seems like, to me, is just sort of a sad portrayal. I don't know if I actually smacked an adult who was 20 years older than me or 30 years older than me while I've been drinking alcohol. I probably wouldn't stay in that sport. And I'll tell you, like, I don't tell the story very often, but at Daniel's last Strikeforce fight, we were at the after party. It was late, 1 or 2. And this man who was part of the company that paid Daniel his biggest commission thought it would be really clever to put his hand down my shirt and grab me really hard. So much so that I had like giant bruises. And I reached up and grabbed him. And, as Daniel says, don't grab her. I watched her punch a grown-ass man in the face. But after that, John, I haven't had a drink since. Not because I didn't feel like the guy deserved it. I think he did. Because I did it out of anger. And I'd been drinking. And if I had just been angry and I hadn't been drinking, I wouldn't have punched him. And I thought, I don't want to be this person. And I have really relatively little to lose. Why does somebody who has so much to lose, what has happened to them? What part of their soul are they missing?
Well,
what's the problem there?
You're kind of equating financial gain and success with class. All the money in the world, all these accolades, whatever. If you don't have class and you aren't happy with who you are, and you don't understand how to treat people, maybe they gave McGregor made a ton of money, obviously in the UFC, but also with his proper 12 and some of the other things he's been doing. So who knows? I mean, maybe the fact that he lost his last 4 fights and he's always identified as a fighter and got his ass stomped in the last 4 fights and hasn't won anything, and now he's in this. I mean, maybe there's a lot of demons that he's trying to deal with. But I think with John Jones, life and bad decisions and the consequences have a real interesting way of humbling people. And I think he, was severely humbled. I mean, failing drug tests and this. I mean, and all the other stuff he went through, and then to come back and he finished. What was it? Cyro? Is it Gain? Gane? Yeah, Gain. Yeah. Yeah. So he went in. I mean, had an unbelievable showing. Put a camp together. Came out in shape. I mean, obviously much bigger than he'd ever been. I mean, what did he fight at 205 and show? He was never a 205 guy. So, but it's pretty interesting to see how life has a way of humbling people. So, I mean, hopefully, Conor doesn't get humbled anymore. But man, it's getting his leg broken the way he did. I mean, that's a hell of a deal. So.
Oh, it's terrible. And I think people think of humble as a bad word. I mean, if someone says to me how I've never been humbled, I would be concerned for them. The
comment is wait.
One of the greatest.
Like the comment when somebody hasn't been humbled, you're like, give it time. Life has a hell of a way of coming back and humbling people. And if it hasn't happened, it's right around the corner. But yeah, it's pretty wild. Do you ever make it out to Austin or Texas or any of this?
I'm actually going to be coming out to Lubbock, I think, pretty soon to work with that. I was talking about, I love Texas, and so I've been asked to come out 3 or 4 times. I come out there and coach every once in a while.
Well, I was going to say if we can make it down to Austin, I'd love to. Obviously Matt would love to meet you, and then also I'd love to introduce you to Victor and those guys. I'm fascinated to see what you could pick up and how you could help them. It'd be great to at least have you meet them and see if you could help. I mean, like I said, at the end of the day, if you can't take something from somebody, you probably need to get out of the business.
Well, I'd love to do that. As soon as I get my arrangements made to go back to Texas here, I hope to go in September. So I'll let y'all know. That
sounds great. And then I know you name dropped it earlier, but wrestlingprep.com is the best way for people to find you.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, and they can text me. My number's on there. I'll answer back as soon as I can.
Awesome. Well, dude, thanks so much. I'm really glad we were able to put this together, and it was great to meet you.
Welcome.
So.
You too. Thank you.
No problem. Look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.